Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Artsbeat TV and Radio here on Westfield Community Programming, Channel 15, Southwick Community Programming, Channel 15, and 89.5 FM WSKB. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach, and today we have a chance to chat with the Majestic Theater's Danny Eaton. Happy New Year, Danny. You need to turn your volume on. Can you hear us, Danny?
I can hear you. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thank you.
So you guys got finished. You finally got up and running this year, and with a presentation of the pitch, and then your annual Home for the Holidays, which I understand sold out most of the time. It's a great way to come back to the theater world, huh?
It is indeed, but actually, I can. This is not going to air for a few weeks. Am I correct about that?
Well, we're taping on New Year's Eve, but it's going to run in, I think, 2 weeks.
Yeah. So I can share this then because we have not announced it yet, but we will next week. We have had to postpone our January production of Betty and the Patch. Excuse me. Because we had 2 days before we were scheduled to start rehearsal, we had COVID breakthroughs amongst the cast. And so those folks have all had to quarantine for 10 days, which is the equity requirement, which meant we couldn't rehearse it. Long story short, we've postponed the show until June 9th, I think it is. And we'll pick it up again, but we're still on schedule for Blithe Spirit and 9 to 5. And, knock on wood.
Knock on wood, it's been, we all have to be resilient in this world of the theater, let alone everyday real life.
I know. And we thought we were doing okay. We had some positive tests during the holiday show, but we were able to bring people in and move people out and continue the show, and the audience really didn't notice, and so we were successful there. And we've had understudies for all of our other productions as well, and haven't had to put any of them in. So understudies lined up for Betty and the Patch, but understudies got COVID got the breakthrough.
Yeah, as we're chatting today, there's this big to-do on Broadway. Some Broadway bigwig made a comment about, well, if the shows could afford to have standbys and understudies, and the reality is that almost all Broadway shows do, and most theatrical productions do. It's a requirement. And so people that have been going to shows in New York have seen understudies in a lot of the parts. Now, I could certainly understand if you were going to see The Music Man with Hugh Jackman and you paid $500 to go see Hugh Jackman in a show and he's out and the understudy's in, feeling some disappointment. But by and large, these understudies are as well rehearsed and well trained as the people that they're covering for and all. So your shows generally have understudies, right? As part built into what you're normally going to do.
Well, this year, certainly, yeah, we've had understudies sort of across the board, simply because of COVID. And, that it's certainly an additional expense, but it would certainly be less expensive than having to cancel performances, so.
Yeah. So does Actors Equity, they are very strict. They provide a lot of rules and regulations for you to keep a safe workplace. What are some of the things that are required during COVID?
Yeah, well, everyone has to have a negative PCR test before we even begin rehearsals. And then there's a testing requirement for rapid tests 3 times a week, and a daily check-in, get your temperature taken, answer a short survey, and that kind of thing. So it's and we've had to actually employ a team of COVID compliance people to do that, to be present at every rehearsal and every performance. So it's a challenge, but it's, it's better than the alternative, and that's being dark again.
Yeah, so you said that there were a couple of incidents during Home for the Holidays. Did you have understudies ready to go, or did
We,
you pull in people that had been in the show before and throw them on stage with an hour or two of rehearsal?
yeah, yeah. Well, we brought in Kate Rankins, who's done the show before, and she was able to pretty much jump right in. And then one of the performers, she had close contact, but never tested positive. So uh, she just had to go through that that process of not really quarantining, but testing every day for I think a week or so, and then get a PCR, and that was negative, and so she was able to come back in to the show for the last two performances. So it worked out. It worked out. So
So Betty and the Patch was ready to go into rehearsal when you had to postpone it.
exactly, yeah.
Tell me a little bit about it. It's a new play, correct?
It is a new play, and I wrote it. It in some respects, it's kind of an homage to uh, the original Betty's in the Patch restaurant out in Agawam, which was kind of a favorite place of mine. It was really, I don't know if you recall that restaurant or not, Mark, yourself.
I don't. I
Um,
don't know. I mean, I grew up on the other side of the river, so
right.
Agawam and West Springfield were sort of not places I normally went.
This is a little foreign territory for you. Um, but it was this great little hideaway kind of restaurant, run a family restaurant, and run by this woman named Betty. And if you ask me what her real last name now is, I can't remember. But it was an old post and beam kind of structure, an old house, and lots of little nooks and crannies. And the food was great, and it was very, very private, and so it had this this kind of charming, very rustic, kind of a secret getaway aura about it, and it was one of my favorite places, favorite restaurants. I got introduced to it when I was working at the old Stage West back in the '70s, and sadly, it burned down. And then I think the daughters opened a restaurant called Betty's Townhouse to kind of continue the tradition. But that didn't really last too long. It was more like a banquet place than a restaurant. But so I my play was kind of an homage to the original Betty's, and but the story itself is completely fictional.
Now, the cast that you had assembled, will they be able to come back and do it in the spring and your production team, or do you have to start from scratch?
No, well, the cast is all in place, and barring any other COVID breakthroughs, um, and as are the understudies, and the set was like 90% built, and half of it installed over in our rehearsal hall. So we've taken that down and stored it away, so we'll be able to kind of reassemble things, I think, pretty quickly.
Yeah. Who were some? I know one of the people in it who had mentioned to me that he was doing the show. But who are some of the people in Betty in the Patch?
Well, Christine Anthony, who lives up in Shelburne, or actually Heath, is and who did the reading several years back, couple years back anyway, when we did the stage reading for it. She is playing Betty. A fellow from New York, Rodolfo Soto, is playing Bobo Henderson. Katie Mack, uh, who I kind of had in mind all along as I was writing the script is playing Betty's daughter, Christina. Liam Toner is Christina's fiance. And then a couple other guys like old high school friends of Betty. Uh, our mutual friend, Brad Shepard, was going to take on, is going to take on that role. And Russell Garrett, an actor out of Boston, is coming in for the other character.
So people that have tickets for Betty and the Patch can just sit tight and use the tickets
Yes.
when the show
Yeah, they
runs in
will
June.
have, by the time this airs, they will have gotten a robocall, an email blast, and they will have gotten a postcard as well. And essentially, their tickets are going to be valid for, the same performance night out of the week. So, if their tickets were for Thursday night at 7:30, it'll be for in the first week or the second week or whatever. Their tickets and their seating will be exactly the same, just kind of leaped ahead 6 months. So,
Yeah, and so the show will run in June, which kind of like it precedes the summer theater season of sorts. So people will still be able to see it and go see all the other stuff they catch during the summer months.
yeah, yeah, we'll still have,
So
we'll still do a children's theater. We'll still do an improv night, and we'll still do concerts. And um, the run of Betty will, you know, run through June and into the middle of July. So it'll cut into the concert season a little bit, but we'll still do a lot of our traditional summer things.
that's great. Now you had other shows lined up for the year. Hopefully, knock on wood, they can go on as scheduled. But it wasn't. One of them I know is the musical 9 to 5, and the
Nine to
other,
five, yeah,
if I remember right, was the Noel Coward play Blythe's Spirit.
that's correct. Yeah, Blythe Spirit will be the next show, and opens. I think it is February 24th, and it'll run for 6 weeks, and then we jump into 9 to 5.
Now, Blythe's Spirit, that's a real old comedy chestnut. What made you
It
pick
is.
that? I mean, it's familiar. People know the title, but you don't get to see productions of that very often.
No, not too much, but we always look for kind of a classical drama or comedy for that slot, that fourth slot in our season. And I've been interested in a British sort of costume piece for a while now, so it seemed to be a good fit. And Noel Coward is Noel Coward, so
Yeah, I mean, I remember studying the play in college because there was a musicalization of it that Noel Coward was involved in called High Spirits, and
right.
with Tammy Grimes and Beatrice Lilly, and I don't remember the guy who played the Equalizer on TV played the role of Charles Condamine, the writer who invites a woman to a seance to bring back the spirits and ends up bringing back the spirit of his first wife,
His
who
first wife, yeah.
who is in conflict with his current wife, and all that. And it's been done many times. Most recently on Broadway with Angela Lansbury playing the role of the the woman, Madame Arcadi, who runs the seance and stuff like
Right.
that. Have you cast Blythe Spirit at this point?
Yeah, it is all cast. And yeah, Russell, and we've got understudies for everybody. Um, Russell Garrett, great actor from Boston, is coming in to play Charles, and actress from New York, who goes by the name of Fleece, coming in to play his wife Ruth. And let me think off the top of my head, we got Janine Haas in the cast. Uh, Kaylee Flanagan, the maid Edith, and uh, Stu Gamble is the doctor, and Christine Voiko is the doctor's wife. So we've got a really solid sort of ensemble cast for it.
And then 9 to 5 is the musicalization of the movie with Lily Tomlin and Jane Fonda and Dolly Parton.
And Dolly Parton, yeah.
And I've never seen the musical version of 9 to 5. I know that Dolly Parton wrote a score for it. Does it follow the movie?
It does follow the movie pretty closely, yeah. And, interestingly enough, 9 to 5 was part of our season back in 2020 when we had to close down. And, interestingly enough, that there's such demand for that show. And we had to hang on to it, We had so many tickets sold for the production, and so it's kind of a promise. And I know there's like just huge demand for it right now already. I think. So
we got to knock on wood again and hope that everybody's theater schedules are back on track by the time that one comes.
Yeah.
We're going to take a quick break, Danny. We're going to take a fast break to acknowledge the underwriters that make Artsbeat possible here on Westfield Community Programming Channel 15, Southwick Community Programming Channel 15, and 89.5 FM WSKB. Peter Coles is our chief engineer. I'm Mark Auerbach. We're chatting with Danny Eaton from the Majestic Theater, and we'll return after these messages.
Support for community radio on WSKB provided by Westfield Electroplating. Employing over 140 skilled platers, painters, and technicians, Westfield Electroplating was founded in 1946 and was the first company in the country to achieve National Aerospace and Defense Contractor Program accreditation, proudly maintaining that status for over a decade. Westfield Electroplating provides over 50 quality finishes to meet your corrosion, cosmetic, or performance needs. On the web at www.westfieldplating.com or 413-568-3716. Westfield Electroplating, putting the finishing touches on technology.
Support for the community programming of WSKB is provided by the Barnes & Noble College Bookstore in the Ely Campus Center, offering Westfield State t-shirts, sweatshirts, and gift merchandise, all of your academic needs, and offering textbook materials in new, used, ebook, and rental formats. Available at the bookstore on campus or online at westfieldstate.bncollege.com.
Hi, this is Harry Rock, host of Rock on Westfield every fourth Wednesday at 8 a.m. Tune in for my view of this place I call home.
Community Radio.
89.5 WSKB.
Live from Studio 120 at Westfield Technical Academy, this is WCPC Channel 15 at 89.5 FM, WSKB Westfield.
Welcome back to Artsbeat, everyone. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach. Peter Coles is our chief engineer today. If you've missed a part of today's program or you want to play it again or share it with friends, you'll find it archived on YouTube at WSKB Community Radio. One of our local theaters, the Majestic, is known for not only producing comedy and drama and musicals, but really prides itself on producing a lot of new works. And Danny Eaton, their producing artistic director, is with us today. He's written a new play, Beatty and the Patch, which will be coming up this June. It was originally planned for this month, but it needed to be postponed because of the upsurge or the uptick of COVID, and just making sure that theater going is safe for everybody involved. Last year, or the last full performing season, the Majestic did the world premiere of a baseball-themed play called The Pitch, which was written by a former reporter from the Springfield newspaper, Stan Freeman, and The Pitch was revived, and it reopened your season this year. You've always had a commitment, Danny, to doing new plays. How many new plays do you think you've done since you've opened the Majestic?
I think, perhaps not always, but perhaps one a season. mean, I'm a writer myself, and so I'm always interested in getting my own plays produced. But um, you know, especially want to support local writers as much as anything. So um, and Stan sent me his script, and I kind of fell in love with it, and thought our audiences would also appreciate the story of it. And um, another friend of mine, Battelle Arnold, who's originally from the Dominican Republic, we produced like a few years back her new play called Tight Pants, which was set in the DR, and I'm kind of working with her now on a new script that she's working on. Todd Cadis, who's our treasurer and marketing guy, also a writer. We're producing his new play next season called Love, Millie, and Murray, kind of a two-hander, kind of a kitchen play, two sort of irascible characters who've been married for 50 plus years, and their lives kind of revolve around the various doctor's appointments they have to attend to. So yeah, no, I think I do. I just think it's important to develop new works, and so if I had to start things all over again, I would love to only do new works. I think that would be terrific. Uh, it'd be great to have a second stage where we could do that, as an example.
Yeah. I mean, most people going to the theater tend to want to go see the familiar, whether it's a comedy, a drama, or a musical. And those are the ones that generally tend to sell the tickets first. But the new works are the ones that attract the national attention and really take people on an adventure. I know that theaters like Theater Works in Hartford, Hartford Stage, Barrington Stage now really program a lot of new work
Right.
amongst their popular fare, so to speak. Have any of the plays that started as the Majestic in your time gone out to other theaters?
Um, Not yet. No. The short answer is no. The pitch was scheduled to go into New York for an off-Broadway run, but that got postponed as well. Hopefully, when the spring rolls around, that may happen. Um, so we'll see about that. I noticed, some years ago I had a play that was one of mine that audience were really kind of very positive about, and I said, "Oh, this has got to go on. This has got to go on." And I shopped it around in New York for a while, and I had um, some producers looking at it and somewhat interested in it. But you know, the for a play that we were able to produce at the Majestic for $120,000, let's say, something like that, would would even for an off Broadway run would you'd have to capitalize at like $500,000 just to get started. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge for sure.
Yeah, and are you? Do you have the capability, or is this something down the road where you would produce plays to be streamed, or are you sticking with live performances at this point?
I am not. I'm not a fan really of streaming shows. I think it just takes away the live audiences, which for me is what the theater is all about. If you don't have a live audience, you really don't have theater. You got some other uh, kind of animal. It's not exactly television. It's not exactly film. Um, what the heck is it? But
Yeah.
but for me, it's not really theater. So
No, I get that. We're just about out of time, Danny. So how can people find out about the remaining shows on the season, and where do they go to get tickets?
Well, also, they can always go to our website, www.majestictheater.com, certainly, or simply put a call into our box office, area code 413-747-7797. You could also email me or email any of the folks. You could get those addresses off our website, and stay in touch that way. And we're very determined to stay in contact with our patrons. As I mentioned, because of the postponement of Betty and the Patch, we've done an email, or we will have done an email blast and a postcard and robocalls, and so we're really determined to stay connected with our audience base.
Well, Danny, we're going to have to check in with you at the end of February when Blythe's Spirit opens, and then you
Absolutely.
folks have a chance to see Blythe's Spirit and or 9 to 5, and then following 9 to 5, let's knock on wood that Betty and the Patch gets its chance in the sun, and that this COVID variant doesn't force us all to sit indoors for the next few months.
Right, I'm with you.
So we've been chatting with Danny Eaton from the Majestic Theater. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back with more Artsbeat, so don't go away.
Support for the community programming of WSKB is provided by Westfield Bank. For more than 160 years, Westfield Bank has been an important community presence and commercial leader in the Pioneer Valley, with convenient full banking services in Westfield, West Springfield, East Longmeadow, Agawam, Feeding Hills, Springfield, Southwick, as well as Enfield and Granby, Connecticut. Visit us on the web at westfieldbank.org. Underwriting for the community programming of WSKB is provided by the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Westfield, serving the youth of the Whip City and surrounding communities since 1969. For more information on the Great Futures Club for ages 3 to 5, happening weekdays, and the Club Teen Center for ages 11 and older, weekdays from 6:30 till 8 p.m., go online at bcgwestfield.org or visit the club at 28 West Silver Street. The Boys and Girls Club of Greater Westfield. Great futures start here.
Join us every Thursday morning
from 6 until at least 7:30.
Check out the Bobby G and Company Show
right here on WSKB 89.5
Community Radio.
89.5 WSKB.
Live from Studio 120 at Westfield Technical Academy, this is WCPC Channel 15 and 89.5 FM WSKB Westfield.
Welcome back to Artsbeat, everyone. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach. Peter Coles is our chief engineer. You are either watching us on Westfield Community Programming, Channel 15, or Southwick Community Programming, Channel 15, or listening to us on 89.5 FM WSKB. My next guest is Justin Beatty, and Justin and I have been working on a project which it just took place called the Arts Hub Virtual Creative Economy Summit, which was an opportunity for creative individuals, artists, small performing companies, visual artists, dancers, musicians, and all in the 4 counties of Western Massachusetts to begin participating in a new program called the Arts Hub, which is a kind of a central point for connection and networking for everybody in the creative economy. And as we work together, one of the things I was tasked with was some of the PR and the marketing, and one of the elements that Justin was tasked with was helping to bring the indigenous creative community in our area to this Creative Economy Summit, not only as presenters, but as participants, so that people in the creative economy and industry here could learn more about the resources from the indigenous communities throughout the area. And I realized in working with my colleague Justin, I know so little about the indigenous American colonies here and the background and how these communities interlink with ours, I thought I just wanted to have Justin on for a half an hour and ask a million questions. So good morning, Justin. How are you doing, and Happy New Year?
Good morning, Mark. I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me, and Happy New Year to you as well.
So, I've been attending theater forever, but in the last year or so, the more I go to performances, the more the performances begin with somebody giving a curtain speech besides turning off your cell phones and hear where the exits are. They thank the indigenous communities, and they mention some of them by name, whose land that particular theater company is occupying or presenting theater on. And we all know that regardless of what our backgrounds are, there were people living here in North America by the time we got here. And so there are indigenous communities throughout North America, and still, I would assume, quite a few within New England. Can you give me an overview of how many people we're talking about and how many different indigenous nations are from the part of New England where we live and work?
Sure. Historically, there were several hundred across the United States. Even presently, there are 576 federally recognized tribes, another 60 that are recognized by individual states, and then beyond that, groups of Native people communities that have just always lived where they live that participate in their specific cultures and the like, but are not necessarily formally recognized by any governmental structure. In New England, in Western Massachusetts, there are a few prominent groups. You have Nipmucks, you have Abenakis, you have Mohawk people, you have Wampanoag folks, you have Mi'kmaq folks, Micmac folks, you have Lenape folks. You have a fair amount of folks specifically in the Western Mass area. Extending outward from that, the number increases because you also, within a particular Native nation, you may have separate groups called bands, right? So a band is generally a larger group of families that chose to sort of operate together within a nation, and then that drills down into clans and so on and so forth. So I would say, like, in terms of major and well-known recognized tribes in Western Massachusetts, there's about 5 or 6. And then of the smaller and non-recognized groups, that probably jumps up to about 15, 20. Yeah.
Now, I know that many tribes were resettled by the government and by individuals over our, the period of time that the United States was settled and formed. And you hear about reservations, particularly in Western states. But what happened here in New England? Were there reservations, or did the community sort of stay where they were or combine in other parts of the area? Because you don't, maybe I'm not, and if I appear naive, I'm not trying to. I'm curious. You don't drive through an area and necessarily see signage or see that this was a particular community that was in this area, or that there's a particular community living there now, where you do when you're out west. So the groups that were here, as the area was settled by the British and the French and all of that took over the lands, what happened to the people here?
So there's various shades of that, right? So there was some displacement, like outright displacement. There were some reservations that were created. There were some situations where treaties said, okay, listen, we're not gonna bother you in terms of us encroaching on your land beyond this point. And the initial boundaries that were set were for the Europeans to stay in a smaller area. There are reservations throughout Massachusetts and in other states as well. There is, the Nipmuc have a reservation in, I think it's Grafton, Mass, Hassanamisco in Grafton. The Mashpee Wampanoag have a reservation. They have land in trust, which is now going to be in Taunton. I can't remember the total amount of acreage there, but they have land. The Aquina Wampanoag have land out in Martha's Vineyard, which is their traditional homeland. So, these groups do have lands. In fact, I believe at Hassanamisco, part of their territory is unceded. It has never been owned by the United States government, through treaties and agreements and whatever. The United States has just never had a portion of that land within their purview. But then you have things like Natick, which was what was considered a praying town, where Native folks who were converted to Christianity were moved to these towns where it's like, okay, you're a Christian, you're going to live as we do, you'll be safe here in these towns. So there's what's called the Natick Praying Indians, which is a band of the larger Nipmuc Nation. So there are a few different sort of ways these things have played out. Yes, there were removals. A lot of the folks, in American education system are like you, are not given a comprehensive understanding of what happened to Native people. The average person gets about 18 semester hours a year between grade school and high school. And generally that takes place between October for Indigenous People / Columbus Day and Thanksgiving. Generally, they only talk about the Wampanoag folk, right? They talk about the interaction between Wampanoags and the Pilgrims. Depending on where else you live in the world, in the United States or in Canada, you may hear a little bit more about local nations to where you are. And then a lot of other people, their knowledge comes from things they saw in movies or a book they read or something they heard once that kind of sounds cool, and they will run with that. It's a very complex history. It's a very engaging set of parameters and information once you start to learn about it. There's so much to know. But Native folks have been resilient throughout all of this. We've adapted through all of this. Many of us still are able to remain in our homelands, even if it's not in the formal sense of a reservation, the way most people think of that sort of rules and regulations about the boundaries of where you are. But depending on where you are, when you drive certain places, if you're from there, oh, that's the Native part of town, or, oh, over there is a traditional space where, such and such happened. And then in certain places in New England, when you drive, if you go down to, let's say, Foxwoods, portion of that land in Ledyard is their reservation. And you drive and you say you're now entering the Mashantucket Pequot Reservation. Or if you go to Mohegan Sun, you're now entering the Mohegan Reservation or Schaghticoke, or depending on. But the signs are not, these giant billboards or blatant signs. Sometimes they're just a little small road sign, because the problem can also be if people know it's there, they can cause problems.
Right. Let me ask you another question. America's a melting pot of various civilizations and cultures, and we learn through education and through our families, primarily. Our backgrounds are, where our forefathers came from, and probably some of the culture that we see. For example, a lot of my family are Russian, and the ballet world comes from Russia. So my mother and my aunts would take us to the ballet, to the Russian ballet when we were children, and we'd learn a little bit about our past. But we didn't learn much about other cultures growing up in New England. I mean, you might learn about American history was taught, as though there was nothing here before 1492 when Columbus arrived. How do indigenous communities learn about their backgrounds since it's not all over television and it's not in books and not in our popular culture and fare, the way some other cultures are represented. Are there programs to teach indigenous people about their backgrounds and that of other indigenous cultures? There are programs available, for example, in the schools to teach non-indigenous people about indigenous culture in their neighborhood?
Yeah, so there are a myriad of ways that this happens, right? Some Native folks are lucky where they have been able to be connected to their culture, throughout the years. Things are passed down, they participate. I myself happen to be one of those people who's pretty lucky. Although I'm not in my traditional homelands, my traditional nations, the Ojibwe people and the Saponi people, the Ojibwe folks, my folks from Canada, and the Saponi side of my family, we're from Virginia and North Carolina. But my mother made sure that we had access to cultural events, going to powwows, going to ceremonies, being able to sit and speak with elders to learn about our culture. So in that regard, there's a ton of cultural opportunities for folks. By the same token, there's a fair amount of Native folks that were throughout history removed from their families and put into boarding schools, residential schools, and sort of assimilated and taken away from their culture. So they don't necessarily have, and they haven't had the opportunity to pass down or participate in some of the same ways. Yeah. However, younger people, and this is true right now, that we have more people that have gone through the American education system that are at high levels of various fields, right, that are giving back to their community and connecting and reconnecting people that have not had those opportunities. So we have more Native teachers, more Native professors, more Native administrators that are helping to guide curriculums toward teaching about Native folks as part of the standard American education practice within various school systems around the country. There are certain programs and organizations, even here in Massachusetts, that do a lot of Native programming, do a lot of work to help support Native communities and Native folks, and to help integrate folks into how to collaborate and work with Native folk. Two that come to mind. One is actually local, is the Intertribal Council, Native American Intertribal Council of Western Massachusetts. They operate out of Springfield. You have the Mass Center for Native American Awareness, and they're in the eastern part of the state. Can't remember exactly off the top of my head where they're located. You have the Ocotillo Cultural Center, which is in, I want to say Coleraine, but that might not be correct. But they're doing a lot of really good work. They work with Double Edge Theater. They do a lot of programming. They have artist residence program. You have the North American Indian Center of Boston. There's a myriad of local organizations that are created for and run by Native people to work all sides of these issues, right?
Yeah.
Some of them provide cultural training, right? So they teach traditional dancing, traditional singing, how to make your regalia, which is your traditional clothes. But by the same token, they also teach history. And because there's so many different Native nations, you do have to do the work to find out about a specific Native nation. We're not sort of a monolith. We have a lot of different things that are particular to an individual nation. So.
It's interesting because somebody explained to me that the way to bridge cultural gaps and civilization gaps is through food and culture and the arts. And several years ago, public television did a series called Seasoned with Spirit, which was anchored and hosted by a chef who specialized in indigenous and Native American foods and did a 6 or 7 part series. And I remember catching one, and it was about wild rice. Now, it's something, I mean, we see wild rice on menus, and how certain communities in Minnesota harvested it, and how they did an hour on how it grew in the lakes, how it was harvested. And when it ran, it was before the time when you could YouTube everything, and it is out there on YouTube. But people were starting to run through the grocery stores, and they got this appreciation from watching this show about indigenous foods and how it related to them. And music and dance and theater, people seem to be open-minded about going and experiencing other cultures through music, dance, and theater. So we have a large cultural community of indigenous people here, many of whom were introducing their services and programs during this virtual economic summit and making their resources and available to the larger community. If I were interested, for example, in seeing indigenous art or hearing indigenous music or learning more about it, are there regular performance programs or cultural centers that are offering public programs, and where would I find them?
There are a myriad of, as I said, organizations and centers and things like that. The ones that come to mind again are Okateo. They do a Living Presence series where they bring in guest speakers to talk about various Native issues. And they also have artists on site. They work with artists from various Native nations around the country. In fact, I believe one of the ones that's there now as an artist in residence, she's Ojibwe like me. Her name is Tamantha Sylvester. And she does theater. She has an Anishinaabe theater production company, and they write plays and produce plays and the like. There are various art shows. This November, I had a dual show. Part was at the Paper City Clothing Company's art gallery. The other part was at the 50 Arrow Gallery in Eastworks in East Hampton. And we're working on a few other projects for this spring in terms of visual art. There's a young playwright named Jasmine Rochelle Goodspeed. She's Nipmuc. She's written a few plays. She's active in the theater community. She did a play, I guess it must have been 4 years ago. I believe it was called 1675, and it was about the removal of the Nipmuc people from central Massachusetts to Deer Island in the middle of winter. They were just forced on this island. A lot of them didn't survive, but many of them did and eventually made it back. And in fact, as a homage to that, they have a paddle every year where Nipmuc folks and other Native folks from around the United States and Canada and even Central America come up and get in canoes and paddle from Deer Island back out to their traditional homelands.
Let me just break. She appeared in a production at Wham Theatre this past fall. It was an indigenous play from Canada called Kamloopa, which had its, I believe its American premiere at Wham Theatre. And she did quite a bit of interviewing, and all of the actors in that were indigenous American actors. It was kind of a unique theatrical experience that went mainstream, but she was the best known perhaps of any of them. And I didn't realize that she had local ties. I just assumed that she came from New York or LA,
Yeah, she's an amazing young woman. I've known her for a few years, and just extremely talented and dedicated to the craft and dedicated to raising the visibility of Indigenous people in the arts. And so I think when you have someone who has that sort of combination of things going on, success is generally not far behind. A commitment to being the best that you can be at something, as well as the willingness to put in the work, as well as, a vision for increasing the visibility and raising the level of the craft itself. Really, I think that's gonna take a person places, and I'm honored to know her. I'm hoping that at some point I'll get to work with her. I'm a traditional singer, and I'm hoping at some point we can figure out a way to include some of the traditional songs that I sing and that I've written in one of her pieces.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. I mean, you're so much involved in the arts and in bringing, in raising awareness of indigenous arts. What is your arts background?
Well, I'm a self-trained visual artist. I started drawing when I was a young child because my mother used to work for Doubleday Publishing, and she helped to write the blurbs for books, and sometimes did artwork jackets of books. And so my parents kind of always made sure I had access to art. Like I grew up in New York, so Schaumburg and the Hayden Planetarium and Natural History Museum and Botanical Gardens. They were always trying to make sure that I had access to just see a bunch of different things and see what I liked. And my mother was integral in that. She was, had a lot of visual art around the house. And so I grew up seeing art, and then was in the 80s when graffiti started to kind of take off, and I fell in love with that. And just kind of always art was just always part of my life. Um, we were also a very musical family. My father played percussion. My sister played percussion. My uncle was in one of the top European bands, a band called Lafayette Afro Rock Band. They're actually like the most sampled band in the history of music. Um, I had a lot of these creative influences. We got to do plays in school. I went to see Annie in third grade, and had a chance to be in the Wiz and all these fun things. And so it's just kind of always been a part of me. And as I got older, I started to understand that art is not only an expression of self, but an expression of culture, an expression of an extension of how we see the world based on the cultures in which we participate. And so my background being Native American and African American, it's not that I have a unique perspective, just it's one that I haven't seen publicly as often as I would like. And so I create visual art in that regard. I did study art for a while at the University of Massachusetts. I studied with Dorrance Hill and went through some of their studio art programs there. But I realized that the art school way of doing things just wasn't for me. And so I just kind of focused on making things however I could. And it's been worked out in terms of, because I don't find myself constrained by some of the same dogmatic thoughts around made. And that goes for any of the genres that I happen to, interact with.
Are there any people, any artists, indigenous artists in any of the various disciplines that are Western Massachusetts based in one way or another, that are internationally known, that if you were to say their name, people go, yeah, I know who they are?
Well, that's a tough question. I mean, there are some folks that have been through here, like Buffy St. Marie went to UMass Amherst, and she was there for a while. She still had some pretty strong ties to the community. Um, Anthony Melting Tallow, who is a relatively new artist, but he lives in Western Massachusetts. He was part of my show, and he does some really interesting digital work. And Nyana LaFond, who is a local artist, she grew up in Amherst. She actually sort of came to international acclaim through what's called the Social Distance Powwow. I'm on the board of directors for it. It's an online organization for Native folks, cultural organization. We have over, I think at last count, a little over 270,000 members in 100 countries around the world. And she started doing some art around an important issue for Native folks, which is missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. She started doing a portraiture series, and she would post, videos of her working on this online, and people just loved it and went crazy for it. It's really powerful, really engaging, really just like the level of quality of work is just, amazing. And so she's in recent months and just over this past year or so, really become very well known. Um, the other folks are probably more internationally known for cultural aspects. They're dancing, they're singing, rather than what would be considered Western art. It's where our interests are a lot of times are not necessarily fully in lockstep with what Western art is looking for and interested in and promoting. And so, there's a certain freedom in that because we can make what we want to make for us and by us without having to worry about some of the other things. But, there's a detriment to that because sometimes people see it and they don't have the educational background to understand where it's coming from, or they're not sure how it would fit into all of the other kinds of art that are out there.
Yeah. Justin, we're out of time, but I want to thank you for joining us, number one. And number two, will you come back and do another program with us sometime this spring?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's so much out there that people could gain a greater appreciation of in terms of the land that we live on and the people that we're living here and the culture and the art that they have developed. But a lot of us have no way of even finding out where and how it began and where it is. And you've unlocked a few doors and opened a few eyes today. So I hope you'll come back and do it again.
Yeah, and I'd like to invite you all to come to what's going to be called what it's called the Odenong Powwow. It's an in-person powwow that I'm putting on. It will be on the Amherst Town Common on Memorial Day weekend in 2022. So that is May 28th and 29th. It's open to the public. There'll be traditional dancing. There'll be traditional food, music. There'll be art. There'll be clothing. There'll be all of these sort of creative economy things. But, that Indigenous people are creating and are presenting so that you can see directly from us.
Well, email me the website and I'll make sure we get that word out for you.
Fantastic.
Okay, and that wraps up another edition of Artsbeat here on Westfield Community Programming Channel 15, 89.5 FM WSKB. Peter Coles has been our chief engineer today. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach. We'll see you here again next Friday.
My life is totally prepared for a gigantic change right now. I'm genuinely ready to be married.
Right, then why aren't you?
Right.
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 Right. Ba-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da-da. You could drive a person crazy. You could drive a person mad. Ba-da-da. First you make a person feel all hazy, so a person could be had. Ba-da-da. Then you leave a person dangling sadly outside your door, which it only makes a person gladly want you even more. I could understand a person if she said to go away. Ba-da-da, I could understand a person if she happened to be gay.
You think?
Do I know? Nah. But worse than that, a person that titillates a person and then leaves him flat is crazy. She's a troubled person. She's a truly crazy person herself. Dirty flirt.
You feminist. I just don't understand.
Have time in a month. When a person's personality is personable, she should not have sit in her butt. It's harder than a matador coercing a bull to try to get you out of your rut. So single and attentive and attractive a chick is everything a person could wish. But turning off a person is the act of a chick who likes to pull the hooks out of fish. Knock, knock, is anybody there? Knock, knock, it really isn't fair. Not fair, not fair. Knock, knock, I'm working all my knock, knock, a zombie's in my arms. All that sweet affection, what is wrong? Where's the loose connection? How long, oh Lord, how long? Bobby Bobby, baby, Bobby, Bubby, Bobby. You could drive a person frantic. You could blow a person's cool. Like you get a person all romantic. While you make him feel a fool. But when a person says you just don't get her, that's when you're good. You impersonate a person better than a zombie should. I could understand a person if she wasn't good in bed.
She's good.
No shit. I could understand a person if she actually was dead. Ba-da-da-da, exclusive you, elusive you. Will any person ever get the juice of you? You're crazy, you're a troubled person. You're a moving, deeply maladjusted, never to be trusted, crazy person. Yourself. Bobby is my hobby and I'm giving it up.